Most of us that grew up with 8-bit computers have played a text adventure at one time or another. Back then there were a few options when it came to creating your own. The Quill and the Graphic Adventure Creator, or GAC for example. Because these are so old now, they don't have the ease of use of modern software. But luckily for those of you who desire to write new text adventures for old machines, there are better alternatives. This tutorial is going to run through creating a simple text adventure for the Spectrum Next using Adventuron, a text adventure creation system written by Chris Ainsley. For this I will be converting the free game that came with GAC called The King's Ransom, which will show the essential basics you'll need to know. If you are creating a game for other platforms, then 95% of this tutorial is still relevant. It's just the final touches that will be next specific. Adventuron is an easy-to-use online system for creating old-style text adventures, or illustrated text adventures. Everything is held in browser, so there is no installation needed, and your entire game is stored as a simple text file that can be easily backed up. Adventuron's code is very easy to learn, especially if you take it one step at a time, and it has a mode specifically for developing for 8-bit platforms. See the description for all relevant links. It's out of the scope of this video to teach you how to plan an adventure game, but for King's Ransom I've laid out everything I need to make my adventure beforehand. This is the basic map of the game, showing locations and how they connect. The dotted lines indicate areas that have a barrier to entry of some sort. I've also noted which items or objects are obtained in which rooms. Next is the puzzle diagram. This is a very simple game, so the diagram is pretty one-dimensional. For a more complex adventure, you'd probably have several branching paths that eventually all lead to one result. Finally, the important bit. Here is why I've listed every room along with all the accompanying text. I've also listed what objects can be found, certain conditions that may apply, actions you can take, and any barriers. So each entry is basically a rundown of what I need to know to make each room work. You may choose to plan things differently, but what's important is that it's clear and easy to understand, otherwise you'll end up forgetting things or getting all in a muddle while coding. When Adventuron first starts, you'll be greeted with the following screen. It starts with a preloaded adventure. The first thing to do is click on the menu and turn off the side documentation. Then click Start Coding, which clears the editor window. When you do this, it automatically downloads the current project as a safety in case you forgot to save it. Next, we hit Menu again and click on 8-bit compatible mode. This is important as it allows the editor to warn you when using commands that will not work when the game is exported to an 8-bit machine. So essentially you're working with a more limited command set than Adventuron naturally allows, but that's more than enough to create a great game. Now there are two keys that are the most important ones to learn in Adventuron, and they are Control and Space. Pushing these together brings up a command list and other context-specific items, and it is used all the time when coding. So if you make sure the empty editor window is active and then hit Control and Space, the editor auto-generates the basic sections to begin creating your game. You can click play button at any time to test your game. So there we have it. The preset room is pretty empty, but it's the first stepping stone. At any point you can resize these windows to give yourself a bit more room. Also, Adventuron does have an extensive user guide, so just click the button at the top to access it if you ever need to look up commands. And that's the basic setup. Now we're ready to begin. The first thing we need is a welcome message when the player starts the game. There is a specific code block for startup actions that is not currently there, so let's make it. Just click below the Adventuron header, hit Control Space, and scroll down to select the On Startup block. This creates an empty code block. All the code for each section must be inside the braces, so click in here, hit Control and Space, and find Print. Print is a command that basically does exactly that. It prints a message into the game window. You can scroll up and down on the menu with mouse wheel or cursors, but sometimes it's much easier to start typing the command and then select it with the mouse. So now we paste the introduction text into the code. You'll see because I had a return in the text, it's highlighted as an issue. But that's no problem, we just bring it back like this. Now, I want to do a new line, so we use one of the commands that you can put inside text strings, and that is / and then N for new line. Now we go to the next line, Control Space again, and select Press Any Key. This does exactly what it says, it waits for a key press. Now if we click play now, you'll see the welcome text displayed as intended, and the game waits for a key press to begin. It then sends you to the starting location. One of the first tasks to do is to create all your locations, as these are the important initial layer to the whole game. So I reference my map. Now the editor already has an initial location, so let's just go in and alter that. The first thing is the room name that the editor uses to identify the location, and for this one it's called Bridge. Next is the text used to describe that location, so let's fill that in. Now you notice there's an error in the code right now, and this is because I edited the name of the starting location so that the code cannot find that anymore. So all we do is go up and delete my location and then hit Control Space, and it's clever enough to fill in Bridge. This is because it knows there's only one location. If there were several, it would pop up a list and you can choose from that. You can also manually type in the room name if you wish. Now to add the next location. Control Space again, type the name, fill in the text, and so on until all our locations are there. We have all our rooms set up, but we need to tell the editor how they are connected. For this, we reference the map again. For a moment, we'll just set up the main connections and ignore any barriers. We'll deal with those later. So in the editor, there is already a section marked Connections. So we simply hit Control and Space, Bridge, East, Cave Entrance. And there we go, that has set up a very basic two-way connection to these locations. We've told it that going east from the bridge leads to the cave entrance, so there's no need to tell it that going west from the cave entrance will lead to the bridge. It already knows that. There might be times where you only want one-way directions, and for that you just choose the one-way option from the list. So let's go through and connect the rest of the rooms. Now if we run the game, we can move about freely. Objects are normally the vital pieces that allow you to solve puzzles in adventures. In Adventuron, objects can be items you pick up, or even scenery or people. But at the moment we just need to look at our map and our list and create all the items the player can carry. So if we go down to the Object section in the code and hit Control Space, then select Object from the list. Now we fill in the name of the object and the text description. And afterwards we will also hit Control Space and add the Message section, which allows you to add descriptive text for when the item is examined by the player. Then we also add at and select Bridge. This places the object in full view at the specified location. Now we add all the other items. You will note that the lit lamp and key do not have locations specified now, as they are not visible until conditions are met in the game. Also note that because the lamp has two states, lit and unlit, there are two separate objects, each with a number suffix. When the lamp is lit, we will switch one object for another, and this suffix allows the player to use the same noun for both objects. Barriers are a thing that stop movement from one location to another. In this game, the first barrier is the movement from outside to a dark cave, which is only possible when carrying a source of light. So let's Control Space to create a new code section. I'm going to place it under connections as this makes sense to me. So let's make the first one. We want to block access from any location rather than from one specific location, so select block. And we give it a name for reference. And the location is cave entrance. And then we give it a custom message. But we also need to add a condition. So let's add block when not carried. And set it to lamp 2, which is the lit lamp. Now if we run the game and try to go east, you will see that we cannot proceed. While we're here in the block section, let's duplicate this for the cave tunnel and also sort out the locked door in the fortress. Adventuron has a specific command for doors. So we select door and name it Fortress Door for reference. Now it blocks from fortress exterior to fortress interior. And the key is an object called key. There is another barrier in the game, the snake in the cave, but that works a little differently, so we'll come to that later. At the moment, our biggest problem is the dark cave and how to get inside. To do this, we need the player to light the lamp. So here we come to one of the major areas you'll spend time coding in, the on command section. This section reads the input of the player and acts accordingly. So first let's create that section with control space. So we are expecting the player to light the lamp. Now instead of creating a long list of verbs that must be referenced, Adventuron can do this with a simple command, match. Match requires a simple verb-noun combination. So here we will change the text to light lamp. Now there may be different ways that the player lights the lamp though, so these can be added using a semicolon to separate. So let's add ignite lamp. All good so far, but we need to check the conditions under which this is possible. So let's add an if and is carried. And lamp 1. So what we are doing is checking if the player types light lamp and the unlit lamp is being carried. If these conditions are true, then we can deal with the result. So we print a message. Then we need to swap out the unlit lamp 1 with the lit version lamp 2. And there we go. So let's test this. We can now light the lamp and enter the cave. There is only one small issue with the gameplay now. If the player drops the lamp in the cave or tunnel and leaves, they cannot get back in. Now there are several ways you could solve this, such as stopping the player from dropping the lamp in certain locations, but in the spirit of the original King's Ransom, we will trigger a nasty death. Now as a side note, it can sometimes get a little confusing where you should place your code because of all the braces. And this can be a cause of errors that are thrown up, so if you highlight a brace, the editor will show you the corresponding one, which is helpful if you start to get muddled. So let's create a new match condition. Now the input is drop lamp. Now the first condition is to check if the player is actually carrying it. The next condition is to check the location that they're at. So that's if is at and the cave entrance. Then if all this is true, we print the message which kills the player for being foolish. Then we set the command lose game. This waits for a key press before restarting to the beginning. Now we could duplicate this for the tunnel location, but instead we can use a Boolean function to act as an OR. So what we do, we type this. and then add the location, and that means that this condition will activate at either location. One of the barriers in the adventure is the snake that lives in the cave tunnels. If the player enters without carrying the dead rat, the snake bites them and they die. So in the original, as soon as you enter the room, the condition is triggered. We can replicate this by creating a new code section called onDescribe. This section will run when the game describes a location. So let's set this to if is at cave tunnel, which checks your location. Now before we add the next check, we need to think logically about this puzzle. We can check if the player is not carrying the rat and kill them, but we will need to know if the snake has already been fed. We could do this by setting up a true-false variable, but there is an easier way. So if we add if is exists and rat, this reads true if the rat is still somewhere in the game, either dropped in a location or carried by the player. If the rat does not exist, then we do not need the check as the snake has already eaten it. So the next layer of this is if the player is carrying the rat. So if is carried and rat, then we print the message and we use the command destroy to remove the rat from the game. So now we can use an else to control what happens if the rat is not carried. So what we do, we print the message and then we set lose game. So let's test it. Now that works, but we should add a friendly message afterwards. So use \n for new line, and then that's done. The next problem to be faced is finding the key to open the door. The object information for the key does not contain an @ command, therefore it's not placed in a specific location when the game begins. The key is found by examining the tree on the promontory overlooking the lake, so let's head to the on command section and create a match. We want to match the text examine tree and check the player is at the right location. Next, we need to check and resolve what happens when they do this both before and after the key is discovered. So if we go if has not created key, this returns true if the key has not yet been brought into the game. So we print the relevant text and we use create to bring the key to existence in the current room. Now, we need another else command and print the outcome if the key is already discovered. The key is essential to opening the door, but if you remember, we created a barrier of the type door earlier, so we don't actually have to do any extra coding. Adventuron automatically knows the player has to unlock and open the door with the key to pass. In the original game, you can try to go east into the lake, which displays a non-generic message that you can't. To do this, we head to the on command and create another match. Now, if we just try to match east or E, the editor is going to throw up a warning as a verb noun input is expected. We can bypass this by adding a minus sign after the text, which basically tells it that no input is expected for that particular part of the input. So we now check location. And we print the message. And that gives us a custom message when that input is tried. One thing to consider here is while the player may type get gold to pick up the gold bar, they might also try get bar. So we need to make sure both work by creating a new section called vocabulary. So we control space, select vocabulary, and a new code block appears. Now we want noun, and we want gold and bar to be equivalent. So all we do is type gold, then a comma, and then bar. Now both inputs are valid. We're done with the puzzles. The only thing remaining is to check if the player enters the room called bridge with the gold bar to win. Now if you remember how we dealt with the snake, this is the same idea. So we head to on describe. And then we check if the player is at the bridge. And then if the player is carrying the gold. We then print the winning message and select the win game command, which waits for a key press and then restarts the game. Now the adventure is mostly complete. Let's head to the top of the code. I'm going to highlight and delete the Adventuron text and make a new section called Game Information and fill it all in. So the long name is King's Ransom. The short name is Ransom. Now I'm going to add the original authors here. And with a little nod to myself. The original release date was 1986 and the year of release 2021. Now the Uuid is a unique code which is used by Adventuron to track saved games. The easiest way to make one is to go to the website uuidgenerator.net and just copy the code at the top of the screen. Okay, so we give the game now a short synopsis. And we adjust the game version to whatever we feel is appropriate. Now this is set up, if you first click the play button to compile, and then go to the menu and hit save, it will give your backup file the proper title. One glaring thing missing for this remake is the graphics, a major feature for a game created in the graphic adventure creator. Luckily, inserting graphics into Adventuron is easy. For this conversion to the Spectrum Next, we choose a resolution of 256 by 80 pixels for each image. When these images are converted, you get the best results if you stick to the Next palette. I use my own personal Next compatible palette that contains my preferred range of colours. Telling you how to draw graphics is beyond the scope of this video, so use whatever software you like, but save the final images in PNG format. For King's Ransom, I've taken the original pictures and tried to recreate them faithfully as Next compatible images. One useful thing to do when saving your images is to name them the same as the location they will be used at. If you do this, Adventuron will automatically display them at the matching location without any further coding required. Now to import them into your adventure. Go down to the menu button in Adventuron and click Import. This will open a window letting you browse to your images and bring them into the game. Once imported, the images themselves are embedded as data at the end of your code. So let's run the game and take a look. Now you see that the image for this location has not displayed. This is because the file name did not match the room name. You may find that in some adventures, where many locations look similar, you could have a single image that is used multiple times. So all we do is go to our location section and we add graphic equals and then the image name, which in this case is cave. Now, when we rerun the adventure again, the cave image is displayed correctly and our adventure is complete. The last thing we need to do is export the game and convert it to run on the Spectrum Next. Firstly, make sure you click on the Save and Execute button at the top. Then, from the bottom menu, select Export DARD and Graphics and save it somewhere safe. For the conversion, you need to download and install a piece of software called DARD Ready. This software will take the exported Adventuron files and convert them into a format that the Spectrum Next can run. Now, inside the exported zip, you will have a folder of images and a test.dsf file. The preview icon may differ on your machine, as the DSF file extension is already used by other software that I have installed. If you go into the DARD folder, extract the test.dsf into the root, and the images into the images folder. It can be necessary to make sure the images folder is cleared first, so it only contains all the latest images from the current project. Next, you open a command window to the DARD folder and type zxnext.bat. Once that is ready, it will prompt you to hit a key where it will launch your game inside an emulator. After you've had a little play, close the emulator, then if you navigate to the Release, then Next folders, you will find all the files required to run the game on a Spectrum Next. Just copy these across to your Next SD card and run the .tap file. You can rename this file to the name of your game if you like. When loading on the Next, make sure you load the game in Next mode, or the images won't display. And that's how to create a simple illustrated text adventure for the Spectrum Next. I've used this system for my previous game, Rite of the Druid, and I'm also using this to write my next game, Golden Seas, an expansive adventure where you explore the many islands of Terranar in an attempt to uncover the meaning of a strange dream. Links to the relevant websites can be found in the video description. I hope this tutorial has been useful to you, and I look forward to trying out a crop of new text adventures very soon.